Go. Ladies and gentlemen, the time is now. The Sixers season is back in store. Me and Jacob Moreno here to break things down for you over on Sixers Digest today. So excited for each and every one of you to be a part of it. It looks like we got Jacob back in frame now, so we're good to go. We're going to start off with a couple injury talks before we dive into our top 10 bold takes of the Sixers season. But before we fully hit the ground running, Jacob, how you doing, my guy?
I'm doing great. I'm ready for the NBA season to start tomorrow. Cannot wait to watch those opener games tomorrow morning or night, and eventually Sixers Wednesday.
Yep, absolutely. So getting things started tomorrow night, and then we can wait for the main course for the Sixers on Wednesday here. We did get a
Mhm.
couple updates today, kind of talking about the status of some of these guys. So did want to pull up a bit of we know. For starters, no Chris Middleton for the Milwaukee Bucks on Wednesday, but I do think we're a little bit more worried about things with the Sixers. So we got updates from a variety of the reporters that were on site today. This from Noah Levick of NBC here, who tweeted out that Joel Embiid and Paul George putting up jumpers together. Nick Nurse said that Embiid and Jared McCain were partial participants in practice. Tyrese Maxey was a full participant, and George's knee bone bruise is set to be reevaluated tomorrow. So before we dive into our takes, Jacob, what's kind of your feel on the situation for each of these guys heading into Wednesday? What do you think the chances are that we see all these guys on the floor together?
I think for Embiid, I think it's fine.
Yeah.
The team wanted to be very cautious with him. That's why I didn't play preseason, and that's why Nick Nurse says he's not going to practice like much. Well, I think he's fine. I think Kyle Lowry also tweeted that like he had a good workout post practice and like was expecting him to play. So I think the general consensus, whether it's like Nick Nurse or like Sixers reporters, is that he'll be good to go. Paul George, I think I read that he did individual work today. So I'm not entirely sure he'll play. Paul George said on his podcast this weekend in a little snippet, like it'll be a little bit of time. So I'm not too optimistic about him. I feel like if anything, he'll like make his appearance in the Sixers maybe like second, third, or fourth game. So I guess that Sixers and the Bucks are trading a wing for a wing. That's just my guess.
Yeah, I think you're probably pretty right on there. And I kind of wanted to mostly harp on the Joel Embiid situation here. The Sixers are obviously keeping things very close to the vest here. They're not kind of revealing the whole game plan. I totally agree that did want to bring up this exact quote that you kind of mentioned that Nick Nurse said that limiting Joel Embiid's scrimmaging in practice is the quote unquote new normal for him in the Sixers. Nurse added that Embiid is moving pretty good right now and that he still gets plenty of work in. My personal read for this, and again, we don't have exact clarity on this because, as tends to be the case with Joel Embiid and really the Sixers here, is they are guarded with the information they let out. And they do keep it a little more private than I personally think probably is the best route to do things, but nonetheless, that is the situation. I don't think there's anything serious going on here. I think this is the game plan, the knee management, just blueprint that they have in mind for how to keep him healthy throughout the season. I fully expect Joel Embiid to be out there on Wednesday, and from everything that I've read, everything that I've seen, there's no indications of this being another injury, more so just managing what we already know he was dealing with. Have you seen and read the same things there, Jacob?
The exact same things, and I think it really just is a matter of caution. I didn't think Embiid's like health was ever anything to really monitor. So yeah, I think he should be good to go for Wednesday.
Yeah, totally agree there. And shout out to you guys checking in the chat right now. So let's do what we're here to do today, Jacob, and dive into our top 10 takes, our bold takes for the Sixers season. So I went in a variety of different kind of directions with these. I know we kind of talked a little bit about this, but I want to toss you the floor first. I'll give you the first bold take of the 2024 season. What you got for me?
These are kind of just in like a random order,
Okay.
so one might be crazy, one might be kind of minor. But the first one I have is Joel Embiid has his best defensive season since 18-19. And I think that because one, he looks in a lot better shape. There was a video of him shooting around in the blue-white scrimmage, and I think I even tweeted like it looks like 2017 Joel Embiid just got transported into the year 2024. Like he looks great, and with Paul George and Tyrese Maxey, he's not going to have to do as much offensively. He's not going to be a guy who has to score like 35 just for the team to have a fighting chance, like as was the case last season. So I think with that, he'll be able to like harness his rim protection a little bit more, kind of put more emphasis on that. And with the physicality he's in, and also the reduced rule, I think he really is in a position to put himself and kind of reestablish himself as an elite defender. I think these past seasons he has been a bit underrated as a rim protector, mainly kind of been overshadowed by his scoring ability. But this season, I think he could potentially make all defensive team.
Yeah, I'm in total agreement with you. And to add to it a little bit, I would love for that to be a direct goal of Joel's. That this was a guy that when he entered the NBA spoke about how he wants to be a defensive player there. He wants to be recognized as one of the top defenders in the league. And he's kind of been overshadowed by a guy who has led the league in scoring the past 3 seasons. Of course, last year with the asterisk next to it as he did not play the game amount, but officially getting that scoring title the 2 years prior. that should not take away from how electric he can be defensively. I think he's a far better defender than the reputation of him is, but there's still those moments in the game where he kind of floats through or takes off, and there's obviously so much on his plate that you understand that. But I totally see eye to eye with you that now there's no more excuses for that. Now you're allowed to sit back and stay in the I guess back seat of the offense while Paul George and Tyrese Maxey have their nights. Let's make a case for why this should be the number one defense in the NBA. I think the Sixers have a chance this year, and we'll see how that overall plays itself out. But I'm in agreement that I think Joel Embiid has, in two parts, let his foot off the gas a little bit as far as his impact as a defender, and I just think it doesn't get as talked about as much as it should. So I would like to see the commitment, but love this take. All right, well, I'll jump into my first one here. I'm going to start off with Tyrese Maxey, and feeling a little bold about this, I'm saying Tyrese Maxey will average over 27.5 points per game this season. Now, I know that's a lot. I think there's a real chance that Tyrese ends up the leading scorer on this team. For number one, I think there's going to be a lot of nights where he's looked at as the engine of the offense, where there is no Paul George or there is no Joel Embiid or there's one of the two, whatever the case may be. When looking at his trajectory so far, he averaged 8 points per game as a rookie, 17.5 points per game in his second season, 20.3 points per game in his third, 25.9 last year. And the biggest direction I see him taking a stride forward, he didn't shoot the ball particularly well last year with a lot of that because he had to generate so much offense, having so much on his plate. He shot 37.3% from three. For his career, he's a 39.6% three-point shooter. He's been top 5 in three-point percentage in 2 separate seasons of his career so far. I think we see a bit of a resurgence as far as the shooting numbers when he's playing next to those guys. And I just think he keeps getting better, man. I think we're still pretty far from the ultimate ceiling of Tyrese Maxey, which is amazing to say because I think he's pretty much a universal top 25 player in the league at this point. But I think that ultimately shows face with over 27.5 points per game this year. What are your thoughts on that, Jacob?
I think you could very well be right. I'm gonna say I think Embiid will still be the leading scorer because when you think about what he averaged, 33.9 or something last
Yeah,
season.
crazy stuff.
So I don't think I could truly see him like decrease his points per game by like math is never my thing, but like I can see him like decrease his points by like 6 points per game, especially because he won't play that many games, so it will be a lower sample size. So his numbers could potentially be even a tiny bit inflated,
Mhm.
but I could definitely see Tyrese at least averaging 26. Like I definitely think it will be career high for him in points per game, but I still think Embiid will be the leading scorer, and that kind of leads into my take. So I'll let you have the floor for the.
Yeah, perfect. And to add one more thing on there, I will say from one of my other jobs working at DraftKings Network writing over there, I did a piece on a futures article, which the line set for Tyrese Maxey this year is 25.1 points per game. He averaged 25.9 last year. So it's clear that the books are reading into it as he will take a step back with everybody fully healthy. I just don't see it being that way. So if you feel like getting involved there, that's something to keep an eye on. But let's throw it to you, Jacob, for your second take here.
So another aspect of his game, I think Tyrese Maxey takes another playmaking leap and leads the team in assists. I think this is kind of a given considering he's the point guard at this point. There's no James Harden, there's no Ben Simmons, and it's his team to run now. I know that he has Joel Embiid and Paul George, who are also probably gonna, take turns being the facilitator in certain situations. But I truly believe that he'll take that leap. In media day, he said there was something he didn't disclose it, but he said there were some things that he aimed to get better at this offseason. And with how the Knicks guard him in the playoffs, you have to assume, playmaking was one of them.
Yeah.
So I definitely think he'll take that leap and, play next to Joel Embiid, Paul George, and having complementary players like, Kelly Oubre, Caleb Martin. It'll definitely be easy for him to take that leap. If I have to give an exact number, maybe like I want to say like 7.5 to 8.3 ish. I think that's a good number.
Wow.
I think that's definitely. I definitely think he could finish maybe like top 10 in assists per game in the entire league.
Yeah, I love that take there. And to be honest, that's one of the number one things I'll be looking for from Tyrese Maxey this year. I still haven't fully landed on my takeaway in my mind for what is the best role for him going forward. Is he always going to be a score first guy? Can he kind of develop some of these true point guard skills? Those are questions that I still have to see and have answered for myself. And to kind of touch on his stats for last year, as you mentioned, 25.9 points per game, 6.2 assists. So that would be a pretty significant leap there, but I definitely think it's in his possibility. And also wanted to highlight shooting 61% on corner threes last year. Just absurd stuff from Tyrese Maxey. So I do expect a little bit of return to that. But yeah, the playmaking is something I'll absolutely have my eyes on. And particularly when you look about how the Sixers team is made up, with Paul George, with Joel Embiid, with Tyrese Maxey, none of those guys are exactly floor generals or the most comfortable there. So somebody has to fill that role. They obviously have options off the bench as well. But yeah, that will be something to watch. So like that take as well. me dive into my number two here, right in the same kind of category. I think Joel Embiid takes another playmaking leap. I have him for averaging over 6.5 assists per game this year. He averaged 5.6 last year, which was a career high for him. For him, the year prior or before last year, his previous career high was 4.2 assists per game. Embiid's talking the talk a lot about being more willing to defer to others in the offense. He has the true guys that he can lean on now, not just Paul George and Tyrese Maxey, but the Caleb Martins of the world. The other guys will step in and have their opportunities. I need to see him prove it on the floor. I think he watched the way that Nikola Jokic went on that victory to go get his championship there by being a guy who was the total hub of the offense, not just from a scoring standpoint. I thought Embiid's taken some significant strides forward last year, specifically on his ability to read the game, his decision making. He still has some sloppy passes once in a while where one gets loose from him, but I think mentally he takes a significant step forward in his processing of the game next year or last year. I think that shows face again this season, and then it ultimately equates to 6.5 plus assists per game. Jacob, your thoughts on that?
I completely agree, and I've always said that Embiid's playmaking has always been that next step. Last season, we've seen it a bit, but he was just so dominant as a scorer and just got overshadowed by his own greatness.
Yeah.
But I think he developed, a key connection with Kelly Oubre Jr. as a back cutter. Obviously, he drew so many defenders, created a lot of open shots for Maxey, and I think with Paul George, Caleb Martin, as you said, and even more role guys like Eric Gordon,
Yeah.
it'll be really easy for him. See, what do you say, 6.5?
6.5 is my number. Yep.
I definitely think it's a possibility, and it's also a really good way to prioritize his longevity just
Yeah.
by, a mix of what I said earlier, being an elite rim protector as well as a playmaker. Like, it's gonna really, just prioritize his longevity. Like, he won't have to like bang in the post and score 35. It'll allow him to, just kind of let the game come to him. And historically, we've seen this, right? You can go from Jokic to Keem to Wilt. Like,
Yeah.
all of those guys, in order to win that championship, they developed playmaking skills, and it all obviously resulted in banners and basketball mortality. So I completely agree there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think it's a necessary next step for Joel. That's really the lone weakness in his game outside of obviously the injury stuff at this point is teams will still have success when they're throwing interesting doubles off them. The Miami Heat are a team that I think have done a really nice job throughout the years for the way that they defend him. Nick Nurse himself has been at the forefront of some of the best ways he's been defended. So nice to have him on his side. But let's keep it rolling here and let me throw it to you for your third bold prediction for the Sixers 24-25 season. What you got?
This one, I mean, it might be obvious at this point considering the way he played in preseason, but I think Andre Drummond finishes top 5 and 6 man of the year voting.
Wow.
He was one of my biggest takeaways from this preseason. His rebounding, even his rim protection, his ability off the pick and roll. That you can just tell the Sixers missed it as soon as he traded him in February 2022 in that package for Harden. As you can see, 8.4 points per game, 9.0 rebounds per game. Was this for this preseason or last season?
That was last year. That was his stats with the Bulls.
Well, so I think you're definitely going to see
Mhm.
similar statistical output. Obviously, with guys like Dante DiVincenzo, Nas Reed, I don't think he'd be the favorite, but we know with how impactful he'll be as that reserve big man, I could definitely see him finish at least top 5 in the voting. So, yeah, and he's also going to start when Embiid's not going to play, so that might hinder his case a little bit. But still, I think he'll be one of the more impactful two-way players off the bench around this league.
Yeah, totally agree with the premise there. That was gonna be my number one pushback because I think he probably is gonna end up starting too many games for the voters to look at him as a true six man here. I think Andre Drummond is gonna be incredibly valuable to the Sixers team next year, both on court and with the ability with his play, and just the fact that you now have the ability to give Joel Embiid those load management days without praying that Paul Reed can step up for the night or rolling out the corpse of DeAndre Jordan or Amir Johnson or whoever else is down the line there. So very excited for him to get back. I love the mentality that he shows, the outlook, how happy he is to be back in Philadelphia. And I'm very excited about that. There's two directions I want to throw this here. Number one, I did not put this on my list here, but I want to get your take on this. What do you think of a Caleb Martin six man of the year campaign? We've seen him come off the bench a little bit in preseason. It does seem like Nick Nurse is more open to that than I expect to be the case. And I do see a world where if he locks in with that as his role, he could have some great success on it. Now, I personally kind of lean toward preferring having him in the starting lineup, but what is your mentality on his role in this team? Should he start? Should he come off the bench? And could he be a six man of the year candidate?
That kind of leans into one of my takes I'll get into later, but as for him coming off the bench, obviously he's had his best few games coming off the bench in the preseason. I think that started against Atlanta, and Nick Nurse even said after that game he provided a nice spark off the bench. So, if Caleb is off to a rough start as a starter, maybe he could be moved to the bench and kind of like catch rhythm there. So I think it's definitely a possibility. I think the NBA has a lot of talented wings who come off the bench, like the Dante DiVincenzo's, like the Josh Harts. So I don't know if he'd be an absolute favorite for that, but he definitely could be a contender, especially what he brings on both ends of the ball.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I think it's an interesting take, and it's definitely a possibility this season.
Yeah, absolutely. I did keep that off my list of takes here. I will piggyback on the Andre Drummond conversation here. One of mine is I think Andre Drummond averages 10 plus rebounds per game this year. I do think he's going to get the opportunity to do that. We will see at least, I would even say go as far as a handful of 20 plus rebound games for Andre Drummond. There was a stretch of his career where that was borderline normal for him, and he is a guy who very much very much cares very heavily about his rebounding numbers there. I love that. The Sixers need that, and he should fully embrace that. Now, as far as the numbers as a whole, for his career, he averages 12.7 rebounds per game. The most that he's ever averaged in a season was 16, that being back during his days in Detroit. Last year, he had 8.4 with the Bulls, playing in a bench role that I think is smaller than what will be the case here in Philadelphia. Obviously, not in the days in which Joel plays, but there was not really that opportunity for him to have his full stretch in Chicago. Very few where he got extended run with Nikola Vucevic there and everything else. So I think that he does see an increased opportunity, and I do think it equates to 10 plus rebounds per game this year. Could you see that happening, Jacob?
100,000%. Like you said, his role in Chicago is kind of minimalized, and also we touched on it already. He's going to start a lot of games
Yeah.
because Embiid's going to be load managed quite a bit. So it's definitely possible. I mean, imagine one of the more physical and better defensive teams in the league. And granted, it was a preseason; they didn't play their full rotational guys, but he finished that last game with 12 points and 20 rebounds. So he'll definitely have those 20 rebound games, and I think he'll probably relatively easy average 10 plus rebounds off the bench.
Yeah, love it there. And just checking in on the chat real quick. Shout out to Daniel Berry Sports Highlights for checking in. Shout out to Teachers Got Game, who says, "Hey guys, just quickly want to say I hate the narrative around NBA YouTube and Twitter talking heads that Embiid is soft for load management. Damned if you do, damned if you don't." Yeah, I totally agree with that being the case there. It's a no-win situation for Joel Embiid. He's been living through it for a couple of years now. I personally think it's refreshing that he's kind of embracing this. Let me try a different tactic. Is this the best route to getting through the playoffs healthy? And there's always going to be a complaint, because I guarantee even taking this route, the number one takeaway that when we get to the playoffs is people will nitpick if it doesn't work, that there was not enough time to build chemistry, or he's not in good enough shape, or whatever the case. So the bottom line is people are always going to find reasons to hate on Joel Embiid, so I wouldn't get too caught up into it and do my best to ignore it. One more comment I want to throw this your way, Jacob. Shout out to SDanks84, says, "Do you think there is a real chance Drummond is averaging a 3 per game, or is that more of an offseason hype?" So we've seen a little bit of the Andre Drummond perimeter shooting here. What are your thoughts on that, and what are the chances that that does sustain and apply to the regular season?
I think it's kind of a combination of both.
Hmm.
I think it was that game against the New Zealand Breakers where he drilled a corner three.
Oh, yeah.
I don't think it happened since. I think he's attempted a few, but I don't think he made any. So I
Correct.
don't think he'll be a high percentage 3 point shooter. I'm sure he'll, attempt a few throughout the season, but I think that's mainly all season and like preseason hype. I just don't see a world where he's going to shoot like maybe 35% from three. Like he's going to still have a relatively low volume. And even as it, like I would love for him, like I'd definitely love for him to have like a Brook Lopez arc, but it's kind of too late in his career for that at this point. I think maybe he'll take like a minimal stride as a 3 point shooter, but like nothing crazy.
So if I had to pin you down and ask what number, how many three-pointers does Andre Drummond make this year? What do you think? I think my number I would put at 11. I think we see 11 made threes from Drummond this year.
Yeah, I would definitely say like maybe I'm gonna do one below. I'm gonna say 10,
Okay.
even 10. I would say maybe as like a percentage, maybe um 32, and then like a 0.7 attempts per game.
Yeah, I think that's about right. I do think it'll be more of a novelty. But my only other thing I'll mention here is like you will be amazed the guys that are not good shooters by NBA standards. You just watch them warm up, and those guys are making 70% of like 3 pointers and jumpers. Ben Simmons himself will do that. Andre Drummond will do that. Like the guys that aren't shooters, compared to your average person, it's pretty ridiculous just how talented the average NBA player goes. So I do suggest if you guys ever have the opportunity listening in, show up early, watch warm-ups, and you will be impressed with just how good every one of these guys are. So that was my next takeaway with Drummond. I'm throwing to you. This is takeaway number 4, right, Jacob?
Yes, it is, and it's kind of on brand for what's been circulating around Twitter. I
Uh-oh.
think KJ Martin develops into a solid reserve forward. I've been trying to tell everybody on Twitter to buy stock. by no means is this me saying don't trade him, but I think he's going to be better than a lot of people give him credit for. I don't know if you had this saved or anything, but Tyrese Maxey said, I forget who put it out, but Tyrese Maxey said he wants to develop a James Harden, PJ Tucker kind of connection with him, especially off the short roll. And KJ's short roll passing, as we all know, has been kind of an underrated facet of his game.
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting to me because of how like little he's gotten used in his Sixers tenure. So I think with his short roll passing, ability as a help defender and a man defender against wings, I think he could be an interesting piece. It's just that shooting that's the X factor, right? Like he said he worked on a shot, so we got to see if it translates. And if it does, I mean, you're looking at a complete two-way forward, which is exactly what the Sixers are trying to use his contract to trade for. So, like, I think we're going to get to a point at the deadline where it's going to be a real debate if you want to get him, if a guy like Tari Eason or Jonathan Kuminga or Herb Jones isn't available. So, yeah, I think people are going to kind of be surprised with KJ.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat as you, and I'm going to kind of add to this with one of my takes is I don't think KJ Martin gets traded this year. I think ultimately when push comes to shove, they get looking at the trade deadline for what their options are and the player that they're in need of, that he might even be closer to the player they need than some of the options that are on the market there. That when you're thinking about what this missing piece is, this power forward type situation, you're talking about a guy who sounds kind of like KJ Martin, that is athletic, has to be a plus rebounder. I wish he was a little bigger for sure, and the shooting is absolutely that X factor swing skill there. I honestly haven't seen enough of it in preseason to have me that encouraged. I know he's attempted a couple, but it hasn't been something that has been like, okay, something looks like it clicked in his head. But the thing that I'll reinforce is he's 23 years old. You should never be in a rush to kind of give up guys that are highly touted prospects or have this top end ceiling. KJ grew on me a lot last year, that he was a guy entering it that I thought he was just more or less a throw-in on the trade when he coming to Philadelphia. Obviously, you never turn down bringing in young talent, and he was a guy that I was intrigued to see. He impressed me during his time in Houston. Didn't see anything or really a lot, or I don't think anything at all if he even played for the Clippers, if more than the very beginning of the season there. But the reality being that, like, throughout the time with the Sixers, I saw something there. I think the short roll point is incredibly great by you and something that we will see. When they run kind of that spread offense and it is that pick apart where it is that pass in between, hit the short roll and find the shooters in the corner, that's something KJ can do. So I like the athleticism. He seems well liked here. It would not shock me if when we're talking the second half of the season that KJ Martin is definitely still on the Sixers team. Any other thoughts on KJ Martin, or you want to keep it moving to the next one?
I saw us keep booming. I think I kind of said all I need to say. I think, Daryl Morey's always been a guy, well, more so on his Sixers tenure than his Rockets tenure.
Yeah.
He's always been a guy who has kind of been patient. I think you can date it back to the Ben Simmons situation. Like he only traded him for a guy he liked. So I don't see him rushing to trade KJ Martin just because he can. I think, if KJ can develop the skills that we just talked about, there's a real chance he can be on this team. And, maybe he gets traded next season or in the off season when a better option comes available. So yeah, I definitely can see a world where he sticks it out this season and becomes a somewhat impactful player off the bench.
Yeah, definitely. And as I mentioned, does seem well liked, building that relationship with Tyrese Maxey. So important stuff there. Let's keep it rolling. What is your number 5 bold takeaway for the Sixers season?
I would just like to say that real quick. I just saw Aaron Gordon signed a max extension.
Wow. Okay. Interesting.
4 years, $133 million. Wow. Okay.
That's disappointing. We'll do a quick aside on that real quick. I did have him in the back of my mind as the potential perfect missing piece. I did think it was always a pipe dream and no chance that he would ever leave Denver there. What are your thoughts on Aaron Gordon as a whole and like that Denver team? Are you still in? Do you think they're real deal contenders or do you have some doubts, Jacob?
I actually was somewhat encouraged from what I saw in the preseason.
Okay.
I like how they use Russell Westbrook kind of like an off-ball screener. I think that's the best way to use him with his lack of shooting. Julian Strawther also showed promise, and you just kind of have a bunch of X factors between, Strawther, Peyton Watson, and Christian Brown, who will develop into a solid starter. I think he's already had some good experience, especially I think he did a solid job with KD in the 2023 playoffs. So I wouldn't say they're in my top like 4 teams in the West, but I mean, with Nikola Jokic, one of the best players in the world, I don't think you can ever count a team out.
Yeah, no, I'm pretty much on the same page there. The Jamal Murray thing's the number one that's concerning to me is like he looked dreadful at the Olympics and really hasn't looked like the peak playoff version of Jamal Murray that we saw really since that title run. There's just been a little bit off in his game. He's obviously battled injuries. I need to see him play to that peak, and he's a guy that traditionally has started seasons slow, so I don't expect it to be right off the bat this year, but ultimately, like, that's a huge deal for their team. Is he a product of playing next to Nikola Jokic, or is he real deal, this high-caliber guard? He's never made an all-star game. He's been limited a lot. I think Jamal Murray needs to prove something this year. So that's kind of my biggest swing skill there. As you mentioned, I love Christian Braun. I think he's like legitimately like going to be in that elite tier of role player type category, possibly even that potential starter. I think that's probably sounding a little bit short calling that. But ultimately, Aaron Gordon getting his money is sticking around. So you cannot rule out this Nuggets team at all. So well done by them. I do think that's the right move, even though it probably drug on a little longer than it should. But let's keep things moving and stick on the Sixers here. What do you got for your fifth prediction for the Sixers team?
You're gonna like this one because you've talked about him a lot. I think that Aaron Gordon finds himself in the starting lineup at some point. I think, with Kelly Oubre, I think his skill set doesn't really fit the starting lineup that much. And also, we talked about how Nick Nurse was kind of intrigued about bringing Caleb off the bench. And when you look at the roster right now, I think the best option to start, if you want to like bring either of those two on the bench, is Eric Gordon. I think against that game in the Nets, he like kind of displayed what makes him such an effective player. Right, we saw him just drain those deep spot up threes. I think nearly from the logo at one point. And we also saw him, have instances where he was that second creator, drawing in the defense, making reads. We also saw him, pickpocket Cam Thomas and,
Yeah.
make some plays from the perimeter. So I think, if he can, obviously, a hot performance like that isn't too sustainable at his age, but like if he can do that like occasionally every other night, I think there's definitely a world where he could start. I wouldn't say, he's the starter who's going to start, but like I think for a certain segment of the season, I think it's definitely possible.
Yeah, no, I'm absolutely with you. I'm going to take you a step further with one of my bold predictions here. I think Eric Gordon starts 40 plus games for the Sixers this year. It's not going to be the same lineup every night, but there will be when we talk about missing Paul George, talk about missing Joel Embiid. I do think he's going to be a guy that Nick Nurse trusts immediately. And for what it's worth, just last season, he started 24 out of the 68 games that he played 27.8 minutes per game, averaged 11 points, shot 37.8% from three on 5.8 3-point attempts per game. Also, listen to a couple of the interviews with Nick Nurse. One of the things that he talked about, like the priority for getting him in the starting lineup, is he wants to separate the minutes with Eric Gordon and Kyle Lowry. It gets a little repetitive when those two are on the floor together, which makes sense to me. I still lean towards that Kelly Oubre would be the guy that I would have coming off the bench rather than Caleb Martin. But nonetheless, I think the takeaway here is that Eric Gordon will be the guy stepping into that starting lineup. He's just a guy that knows how to play basketball, been around the block a whole lot. I love the deep perimeter range, the way that he extends the floor, and is really one of the more willing shooters that we've had during the Joel Embiid era. So very excited to see how this fully fits together. And I do think that he's going to be a guy who really flew under the radar for a good portion of this offseason. It obviously was a pretty quick signing when free agency started, but there were the bigger fish that we were all focused on. The Caleb Martins, the Paul Georges, all these other guys, these new players that we're excited for. Eric Gordon's going to be a key part of this Sixers team. So yeah, I'm absolutely with you, Jacob. What do you think of that 40 plus number? Do you see a world where that happens or too high for you?
That wasn't like something I was even like thinking about, honestly. Yeah, like I could see it because Paul George is gonna miss time too. Like that really wasn't something I was considering when I was even saying this. So I think it's possible. Maybe 40 is a tad bit. I would personally go 35, but I mean 35, 40 is pretty much the same thing. I think even when Paul George is in there, we'll see him in certain like parts of the season, maybe even a playoff game. Obviously depending on the situation and matchup. So yeah, I think Eric Gordon's going to be a lot better than what people think. Obviously, he's not going to be a guy who, consistently gives you like 12 points a night on like elite shooting, but I definitely think, he'll be able to contribute here and there.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And we got the truth chiming in the comments saying that I got Andre Drummond averaging 15 and 12 with all the games Embiid is missing this year. I think that's totally fair number there. So yeah, we'll see how things shake out. Let's throw it to you for number 6, Jacob. What do you got for your sixth bold prediction for the Sixers team?
I think it's about time he gets his respect again. I think Nick Nurse finishes top three in Coach of the Year voting.
Look at that. I love it. I totally think I looked at this before. He's 11th as far as odds to win Coach of the Year, which feels way too
Dang, really?
disrespectful for me. Yeah, I don't understand. And I think like this is my case for it. If I'm building the pitch for why Nick Nurse should be Coach of the Year, which I think there's a very clear path to that, is that you're missing Joel Embiid this amount of games. You're missing Paul George this amount of games. And you have all these tools that it's on you to build a winning roster. I think Nick Nurse is capable of doing that. I think he's going to elevate the floor of this team in a way that he really didn't have the tools or the means to do with the roster last year. So I'm absolutely with you. I think there's going to be a strong campaign there. I think he's got a decent chance of winning it if they ultimately finish like a top 3 seed, even amid all this load management. So for me, that's kind of the case for how it happens. Do you see any other factors that could play into it?
I think also you kind of touched on, but like he's one of the most innovative and creative coaches in this league. I think when you look at the big three, there's so much to play around with. Whether it's Tyrese Maxey off the ball, Paul George, like, kind of harnessing like his role as a post-up player, coming like off a bunch of screens, Embiid in the post, having him as the facilitator. Like there's so much for him to play around with, and
Yeah.
he really is the perfect guy to unlock all of that. And that's how you've been talking about the role players, how he can use Caleb Martin. Maybe Caleb Martin, like, becomes a short roll guy or a backdoor cutter, and Kelly Oubre, kind of the same thing. So yeah, he just has so many vets also off the bench as well as young pieces to experiment with, top to bottom of the roster. I think he can definitely do a lot of creative things there. And he also is a very defensive minded coach. So I think they're like the Sixers have the perfect roster that like fit Nick Nurse's like ideology and skill set as a coach almost. So I think, obviously the Celtics and the Thunder on paper are the two top teams. So that's why I said top three. Like I can definitely see a world where Mark Dagenhalt
Yeah.
wins it again or Joe Mazzola gets his due. But I think Nick Nurse is going to get some more respect this season.
Yeah, totally agree there. Very excited to see it happen. I'll also note like two things. Number one, I have one funny, one serious. The funny one is Nick Nurse seems like more normal than I expected to be the case. Like when he first came from viewing him from afar during his time with the Raptors, he felt like more of like a quirky guy who kind of had weird, and obviously he still does his like plays his guitar and will hop on a live piano, which I think is very cool stuff. But he's honestly just been a way more normal guy than I expected to be the case. So maybe let's let the personality out a little bit more if he's keeping it uptight or whatever the case. And now on like the more serious talking point here, it does feel like the Sixers have gotten a clearer bridge between like a front office and coaching extension for what the roster should look like. I think that's been an area of disconnect, even dating back to like the Brett Brown era and like actually building out a roster versus what the coach wants and what the team needs. There's always felt like kind of a battle there. And I think about the guys lost in the shuffle, the Isaiah Joes of the world or the Charles Bassies of the world, who obviously like are make or break for winning a championship, but it comes down to maximizing talent. I do think Nick Nurse is better suited to have the eye for it, and Daryl Morey is more trusting in that situation. So I love that that pathway is being built up there. Let me jump into my next take here. I'm going to roll with Jared McCain averages 16 plus minutes per game this year. I think there's a bigger role for McCain than people expect on this team. And the reason that I picked that number specific, Tyrese Maxey, his rookie year, averaged 15.3 minutes per game. I think there's more room for McCain, and with a coach that'll be more willing to play him. I even think I might have lowballed that number. I might be willing to work that all the way up to 20 minutes per game that we see. And I don't think it happens on an every night basis. I think it probably will be some of the coach's decision do not play, or maybe even playing some blue coats minutes. But we're talking about surviving these shorthanded stretches and when there will be the injuries that pop up throughout the season. He is a guy that I think is capable of stepping in way sooner than people are giving him credit. I also think the Sixers have a pretty good game plan in place that you start off with him as kind of a spot-up shooter. Then all of a sudden you put a little more where he's putting the ball on the floor. He's playing a little bit more point guard-like role. I think there's a lot of ways in which you can use him. I think he's more mature than he's gotten credit for at this point, and that he's willing to do whatever the team needs. So I've been impressed with everything that I've seen from Jared McCain. Hopefully that he is okay and does not miss any time at the start of the year, because that was a pretty scary fall. But Jacob, what do you think about that? Could McCain reach 20 minutes per game on the season?
I don't know if I would say 20 minutes because when you think of how much guard depth the Sixers have, whether it's Maxey, Eric Gordon, Kelly Oubre, and Caleb Martin, even if you really like want to go by definition of position, then off the bench you have, Kyle Lowry, Reggie Jackson. So obviously Nick Nurse is more willing to play younger guys than let's say Doc Rivers, but
Yeah.
but I think to start the season, I think obviously he would want to trust, his guy Kyle Lowry more and Reggie Jackson, who was a proven vet. But, if you have games where Reggie Jackson, doesn't have that same spark anymore, or as you said, when they're going to inevitably be shorthanded on, Paul George and Joel Embiid rest nights, then yeah, you definitely will try to look into that bench. As far as being used as a spot up shooter, I completely agree. I think that's where he's kind of hit his stride in the preseason, but also both in the preseason and the summer league. I noticed he did get a lot of reps as like the leading creator, whether it was like off the pick and roll or off the dribble. He had a really good connection going on with Adam Bona. So
Yeah.
I think it's definitely possible for him to kind of get more of a maximized role. Like maybe like you said, 15, 16 minutes. I think it'll be a low sample size, so the numbers will kind of like, like you know what I'm trying to say. Anyways,
Yeah.
but I definitely think that he could get a role, especially, if he shows that on-ball promise as well as being a spot-up shooter. And I also think we'll need to see more better defense from him as well. I think,
Sure.
you know, with his size, it's kind of hard to guard, bigger perimeter guys in the NBA. But if he shows all those things, I mean, he definitely could get a role that similar to Tyrese Maxey had in his rookie season.
Yeah, absolutely there. And I know I got a little fired up about this on Twitter about a week ago at this point, but just public service announcement to Sixers fans here. both Jared McCain and Dalton Connect are allowed to be good players. So I understand there is going to be this folklore. They're tied together. And by the way, I'm not arguing if you believe that Dalton Connect was the right pick there. I like Dalton Connect. I think he's going to be a good NBA player, and I totally understand the logic of that. My only pushback is that both these guys can be good. This is not a one or the other situation. And I think ultimately my biggest takeaway is I think Dalton Connect is very clearly ready to make a more immediate impact. He's 23 years old. He's more experienced, and his game translates right away. If you zoom out and look several years in the future, I'm pretty confident that Jared McCain is going to end up being the better NBA basketball player. Obviously, time will tell how that ultimately plays itself out, but that's just kind of my piece there is both are allowed to be good. We don't have to constantly compare these guys, so just keep that in mind there. So, Jacob, that's my next takeaway. Let me throw it to you for the next one. What you got for me?
I think this one's almost self-explanatory. I think Paul George has a career high year as a spot-up shooter, whether it's from the corner or the wing. I mean, you're playing next to Tyrese Maxey, you're playing next to Joel Embiid, two guys who can cause absolute havoc at the rim. And Paul George doesn't need to be that lead creator anymore. He can just kind of chill off the ball. And Embiid, if he takes a playmaking leap, as we both suspect he will, as well as Tyrese Maxey, I think Paul George has got a lot of easy looks. So yeah, I think it's pretty much it. I mean, he's just going to thrive off the ball. I mean, Embiid and Maxey are going to make life very easy for him.
Yeah, I'm absolutely with you. This was on my list as well. And the way I'm fully setting up is I think Paul George shoots a career high 3-point percentage this year. He said it himself in his first media availability that I've never played with an elite guard and an elite big man at the same time like this. That's the situation you walk into. And I also think Paul George himself is going to be pretty blown away by the amount of gravity that Joel Embiid has on the floor and what that creates for shooters there. So looking at his numbers overall, he actually had his career high in 3-point percentage last season. He shot 41.3% on 7.9 3-point attempts with the Clippers there. That's a ridiculous combination of volume and efficiency. And to be honest, it's been one of my larger selling points why I always thought Paul George was the right option for the Sixers, that the worst case scenario is you're just paying a guy to be a high-level spot-up shooter. And while obviously you're hoping there's more, the creation ability, a little bit of defense, and everything that you're hoping with Paul George, if the worst-case scenario is this dude can comfortably knock down 40% of three-pointers on catch-and-shoot opportunities at 6'8", you know what? Sign me up for that worst-case scenario right there. So I do think that happens. He also shot 45% on corner threes last year, which is a really great mark, and that's a shot that will absolutely be in the offense for Paul George this year. So I think he can hit a career high in three-point percentage. You think that's fair to say, Jacob? You can go above 41.3% this year?
100%. And you mentioned from the corner, Embiid gets double teamed
Yep.
around the baseline, around in the restriction area all the time. So all Embiid does have to make a simple read to the corner, and Paul George is going to be right there to knock it down. So whether it's off the ball, 3-point percentages, 3-point percentage overall, I think you're definitely looking at a career year.
Yeah, absolutely there. So very excited to see this in practice. And again, I think as much as Paul George has been open about it, speaking about playing with Embiid, with Maxey there, I think that first time you get the look of how much of a defense that Joel Embiid commands and how much the focus that he is, it's pretty eye-opening there. So I think he's going to absolutely eat off those. We got a couple more to go to here. I have two more on my list. Are you down to two more on yours as well?
I think I somehow have three more.
Three more. Okay. Maybe I
Yeah,
doubled up. So yeah, hit me with your next one. What we got? What's your next bold prediction for
gotcha.
the Sixers season?
I think the Sixers finished top 10 in offensive and defensive rating.
I like
I
this one.
love how the roster is constructed with a bunch of two-way wings, whether it's just starting lineup or the bench unit. I think with Joel Embiid as the defensive anchor, Paul George, Kelly Oubre, and Caleb Martin on the wings, Nick Nurse as defensive psychopath on the sideline. I think they're definitely poised to finish in the top 10 in the defensive rating. And offense, I mean, it's kind of self-explanatory. You have probably the best big three in basketball on paper between Maxey, George, and Embiid. So if Embiid, obviously, I think it honestly comes down to how much games Embiid's going to play, which is why I said top 10 and not like top 7 or 5,
Yeah.
because obviously availability is going to be a big thing. But when you have so much offensive talent on the floor with Maxey, Embiid, and Paul George, I think it's going to be hard not to finish in the top 10. So I think you're looking at a really well-balanced team, probably the best balanced team in the Joel Embiid era.
Yeah, I love this one. I think this is a great take here and something that I'll have my eyes on for sure. The number one thing that I'll say about this roster is this is the most modernized roster that we've seen built around Joel Embiid. That you're having these guys that are athletic, they're switchable, they can jump out on the perimeter, they don't have to stick to their man. Like there can be all this kind of diversity in the defensive tactics here that I'm very excited about. So yeah, I'm absolutely with you that I think we have not hit the ceiling for what a defense built around Joel Embiid can truly look like, and I think we might this year. And for the same reasons that we mentioned previously, that when there's a reduced just role or what's being asked from him offensively, Embiid himself can lock in a little bit more on the defensive side of the ball. So I think this is a great kind of barometer for success. If the Sixers want to look at themselves as real deal contenders, you have to be top 10 in both, I feel. So I want that to be the case. I think that will be the case. So I think it's a great take out of you, Jacob. And I ultimately do think it happens. That I think they're too talented for that not to be the case, even with the games that which Joel Embiid and Paul George will miss this season. So love that one here. I'll jump to a little bit more boring one for myself here before I wrap it up. Get a little bit more splash here in my final take. But for my number 9 here, I think Jeff Doughton Jr. is the guy who ends up with that 15th roster spot when everything's said and done this season. Doughton's an interesting one. He's probably the oldest two-way contract that I've ever seen, possibly ever, when you look at the rules and the restrictions for it and that type of thing. But he's a guy that's just incredibly solid. Nick Nurse seems to trust him. He's just going to do the right thing on a basketball court. No, he's never going to be the flashiest, the sexiest player. He's not going to be pulling up and having 30-point performances in your face, but he can shoot just fine from three. He knows how to run an offense. It's clear that there's at least that connection and belief from Nick Nurse, dating back to the fact of him bringing him from Toronto to Philadelphia, and the fact that this is how it played out last year, that he was on a two-way contract and then upgraded to a standard deal at the end of the season. The Sixers are approaching this open-minded and keeping their options open in case there is another guy that pops on the market, or there is a trade that's just 2 for 1 or 3 for 2 or something along those lines where they're bringing back another body. But I think everything is said and done, I kind of expect Jeff Doughton to be the 15th man on this roster. Jacob, what are your thoughts on that?
It's funny. Aside from KJ Martin, Jeff Doughton is also like another kind of like underground Sixer that I'm really high on because he just does everything right. I mean, he made the Sixers Summer League genuinely fun to watch outside of Ricky Council and Jared McCain. Like,
Yeah.
he really is the definition of a two-way point guard. He's like really good in the pick and roll. He has a really good mid-range game, which I think is kind of really interesting in today's NBA. The way he's able to stop on a dime, just drill shots from like around the elbow was really impressive. And especially his driving ability off those screens, his ability to, suck in the defense, spray it out to the weak side for an easy three, and also with his length and versatility, he can, lock up the perimeter.
Yeah, he's
So
pretty big.
I think he could be a guy who could contribute in an actual game. The only reason I'm somewhat skeptical is because we simply just haven't seen it yet. All we've seen from him is against, defenses in the preseason, in the summer league, and when you're actually playing in the NBA, he's mostly just there in garbage time. But I definitely think he can contribute. Like, he has the physical tools, he has like the IQ. So yeah, I definitely think he should have an opportunity at some point this season.
Yeah, absolutely. I would love for that to be the case there. That's a guy I have my eye on. And this is a big year for him professionally as well, because he will be too old to sign another two-way contract after this season, or too many years experience for that to be possible here. So it's either you get a standard contract or you start learning the overseas route there. And I think for Doughton specifically, he's got to figure things out. So there will be a decent amount of pressure on him, which is not something that's gotten a ton of talk there, but we'll be rooting for him absolutely. Did want to jump on this comment here from, shout out to the Dark Continent in the comments here, who says, what do you think about Ricky Council in the starting five with T-Max, Ricky Council, Kelly Oubre, PG, and Joel Embiid? I don't think we see Ricky Council quite take that leap in opportunity to jump into the starting lineup there, but I did want to ask what kind of your expectations are for him this year, Jacob. So what are you feeling on what Ricky Council the fourth role will look like on the Sixers team this year?
As for the starting lineup, I just don't agree. I mean, I hope I'm wrong because if I am, we're looking at like
A stud.
an insanely great player on insanely great value. But I think Ricky Council has a lot of holes in his game. I think, extremely athletic, extremely raw prospect.
Yeah.
His ability to just get to the rim, whether it's transition or off the dribble, is extremely impressive. But I think Nick Nurse even touched on this like throughout various post game pressers this preseason. Like, he just kind of emphasizing decision making for him. So
Mhm.
I think in order for him to actually get a consistent spot in the rotation, that'll be a big thing. I think motor and athleticism has never been a question with Ricky. So I think it's just a matter of him blending, IQ with his athleticism and his tools all around. But I think for his role this season, I think I've touched on this in prior episodes, but I would definitely say he'll be in the rotation, but I wouldn't count him in the playoff rotation, if that makes sense. Like, I think he'll be a guy who, plays most of the games, but when you're playing a competitive team like the Nuggets or Celtics, whatever, he's not going to be a guy that's in the rotation unless the team really needs a spark or it's like a matchup thing.
Yeah, no, I think you're spot on with that. It's interesting because the things that he is good at as a basketball player is so not what you expect, like your role player type archetype of players to be good at. That generally you think of good perimeter defenders, good catch and shooters, guys that are 3-and-D kind of cut from that mold there. That's not Ricky Council. That he's wants to get downhill, wants to attack the rim, use his athleticism, and he's excellent at these things. His ability to draw fouls is truly among there with like the best in the NBA, but that's just not something that like is super useful in the role that he will be asked to do. There will be the nights in which Ricky Council swings a game and absolutely is a driving force why the Sixers have a chance to get a victory, but that's not going to be every night there. I do think in the non-Paul George games that there might be a more of an opportunity for him because he is a guy who can be sort of the just engine of the offense in doses where you are a guy taking guys off the dribble or just making things happen and creating madness out there. So I think he'll be relevant to this team. I think that he will play more nice than he doesn't play, but I am in agreement with you that I think when push comes to shove and we're looking at the final 8 or 9 men to make this rotation, we might not be seeing Ricky Council in that sort of opportunity there. So we'll see how things play out. I would love to be wrong and that he, like you mentioned, that he's a guy that's far exceeding expectations there. So we'll see how ultimately that plays out, but definitely rooting for Ricky Council this year as well. Let's keep it moving and roll on to your next take here. I believe this is prediction number 9, correct?
This is actually my last one.
Last one, perfect. All right, let's
And
let it rip.
this is my biggest one. So I think Jonathan Kuminga could be a real possibility for the
Ooh,
Sixers at the deadline. So you trace it back to this past offseason where Daryl Morey said on the Rights to Ricky Sanchez pod, I believe, that they were close to getting a player, but it didn't work out for whatever reason, and there
yeah,
was tons of speculation. And the big guy who was speculated to be in that deal was Jonathan Kuminga because his rookie extension, or lack of, as we speak, hasn't kicked in yet. He's a guy making 7.6 mil, and the Warriors just haven't offered him an extension. The deadline was a few hours ago. They offered Moses Moody, I think, what was it, 3 years, 39 mil,
I
I think,
believe. Yeah, yeah,
something
yeah.
like that.
Yep.
And I think a big point of emphasis in his game, obviously, might not be the biggest sell point, but his lack of shooting. I think that's probably a reason why the Warriors were a bit hesitant. Kuminga's role in the Warriors has been, a little on and off. His relationship with Steve Kerr seems to be on and off as well. So I think if the Warriors don't look great at the deadline, that I think it's possible. I'm not saying it's going to happen or he's the front runner to, be traded at the deadline or whatever, but I think it could be a real possibility. You're looking at a guy who's insanely athletic, almost like a Ricky Council type of player, but bigger, more size. So I think he has all the physical tools to be a very impactful player, whether it's as a cutter, as a just driver off the dribble. Obviously, 3-point shooting is kind of a concern, but when you play with guys like Maxey, Embiid, and Paul George, it'll be easy for him to get looks and find rhythm. And he has the tools to be a very good defender as well. So you're also extending the Sixers timeline with him with Maxey and Kuminga. But the only issue is you would then have to pay him that extension, which is
Yeah.
kind of not a great selling point as well. But I would definitely say it's a possibility at least.
Yeah, I like that take there, and that's something that I'm a Kuminga believer. That I do think that he's a guy that has a real deal NBA future and probably better than he's shown to this point. I liked him dating back to his Ignite days. It has not translated as quickly as I kind of hoped is the case. Which in general, when you look around the G League Ignite products, that kind of has been the book there. That look at Scoot Henderson, look at Jalen Green. It's all these guys that the learning curve has been a bit steeper than I think was the goal of that program, which at this point has been shut down. So I think the cause and effect is pretty clear here. But the bottom line is this guy is the high level basketball talent that he always has been. The Warriors are always such an interesting spot to identify talent for me because they play such a unique system and they're asked to do things that like just are not going to apply in most basketball systems. I'm very curious to see how DeAnthony Melton and Buddy Hield looking at this year because it is much different than just your average NBA offense or basketball offense to that point. But I think Kuminga is a guy that I'm intrigued by. Could he be better in another location with kind of a more traditional setting there? He's not quite the power forward role that we've talked about, but he's closer to that than a lot of the options the Sixers currently have. He is athletic. He is real deal. Got some bounce to him, is willing to go up and dunk it on people, and he does have some creation ability too that I've been impressed with dating back. I don't think he's been able to show that a ton. What would kind of be, in your mind, the package? Obviously, KJ Martin related here, and as you mentioned, the extension is kind of that overarching concern in the back, but do you think it is just KJ Martin draft picks, or is there any more to it?
I think it's probably KJ Martin and draft picks because that's pretty much the only salary you can send out with how deep the Sixers are into the tax apron. But then you also have to sell the for him with draft picks most likely. So that might not be the most optimal route. I think Atari Easton or Herb Jones, which probably is more
Yeah.
unrealistic, would probably be the better option. But I think that's unfortunately what it would take. Just KJ Martin and those few firsts. So yeah, definitely not ideal, but I think it's an option if depending on if the team really needs that extra boost of like a fourth guy. So yeah.
Yeah, I have no problem with it. We'll see how things shape up and how the team's looking when obviously we get closer to the deadline, as this is kind of where I would project that to happen. But we'll shift gears and throw in my last take here. I'm keeping it internal and within the Sixers organization, and I'm looking at this man, Kelly Oubre Jr. right here. I think this season we see Kelly Oubre Jr. shoot a career high in 3-point percentage as well. Looking at back at him throughout his career, that overall his career average is 30, or I'm sorry, last year he shot 31.1%. His career high is 35.2%, career low 28.7%. So it is that 35.2% that we're going with for this number here. That was on 5.5 3-point attempts, and that happened during his time with Phoenix. I think this is another situation where if we can just kind of give Kelly a little bit healthier shot diet where you're only taking the catch and shoot threes when you're wide open, you can absolutely clear this number here. He feels like a better shooter than the numbers have ever indicated. He's the most confident bad NBA shooter that I've seen, because they really just year in and year out don't kind of stand up to the standard that you would hope for a player taking the amount of shots that he is. But there's a lot of things that Kelly does well beyond that. His rim pressure, his ability to dunk, his athleticism. He's still been really committed defensively, at least to start this season. I like what Kelly Oubre brings to this team, but I do think that that 3-point shot is a significant swing skill for how important he can be. And to his credit, he has hit some big ones during his time with the Sixers. That he'll hit some timely 3-pointers, which I do think does matter. There's one that jumps out to my head of him hitting, I believe it was a game-tying 3 last year, with Maxey fired up after the fact. But the reality is, it has to be consistent. He's got to be knocking them down at a regular rate. And if you can just be around that 35% range, or around that league average range right there, we're talking about Kelly Oubre much differently than kind of this fringe starter as is currently the case. So, Jacob, what are your thoughts on that? Can you see him taking a stride forward in his 3-point production this year?
First of all, I'm surprised that he didn't have a career high 3-point pursuit shooting percentage with the Warriors.
Yeah,
I think that was a little bit interesting considering you're playing with probably the greatest off-ball gravity player in the history of the game. But I think I think he kind of has to at this point. I think he has to go back to that 35%. Otherwise, he might find himself on the bench. But I love what Kelly brings outside of his 3-point shooting. As you mentioned, great locker room guy, great athleticism, never afraid to shoot it, whether that's good or bad is up to you. But I think he has a lot of great, qualities that make him an impactful role player, especially with his improved defense as we saw over the season. But I'll say it again: when you're playing with 3 All-Star caliber level players and Maxey, George, and Embiid, I mean, that you can ask for more open looks at this point. So I think it's just a matter of him knocking him down off the catch, and I have confidence for him to do it. I think he's really committed to winning. I think Nick Nurse has gotten the best out of him. Obviously, we saw him take a leap as an all-around player, both as a defender and a playmaker last season. So I don't think there's really a reason to believe that he won't improve as a 3-point shooter. I think I have confidence that he will.
yeah, totally agree there. And for what it's worth, he shot 31.6% during his lone year with the Warriors there. So I want to see over that number. Let's see some real deal. Just give me the league average for Kelly Oubre Jr., and I'll feel pretty great about this. So that is my final takeaway there. Jacob, this was fun chopping it up, man. What else you got going on over there at Sixers Country, Liberty Line? What else you got kind of in your wheelhouse coming soon?
Sixer country. I think I'm just ready for the season,
Yes,
ready to
sir.
just, get back to covering it, highlights, updates, game scores, whatever. Just as always, I'm just excited. I think it's my want to say 7th or 8th at this point covering it on that page. So I'm excited for another great year. Liberty Line, same thing, just constant updates, constant gamers, all that stuff. So yeah, just consistent coverage all season.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll love to hear that, man, and cannot wait to check it out. You guys are not doing it right if you're not following along with Sixers Country. That's the only way to keep tabs on this Sixers team from start to finish this year. So make sure you're following
Appreciate that.
everything for Jacob on all platforms over there, as well as checking out the written work. Jacob, I appreciate you hopping on tonight. You got any final words or final predictions before the debut on Wednesday?
If Chris Middleton's out, I'm sensing a Sixers win. But I will say it would not surprise me if the loss is somewhat ugly because, as we've seen, Joel Embiid, especially not playing the preseason and doing that much work, he always is the guy who tends to get off to slow starts. So it definitely wouldn't surprise me if he looks rusty these first few games and there's growing pains with George coming back. So I don't know if I'm expecting them to hit the ground running, but I can definitely see a win because when you take off Chris Middleton from that Bucks team, Sixers are a better team on paper and theoretically on the court as well. So I'm going to be optimistic. I think with how the Eagles have been this season, how the Phillies went out, I think there's no other choice but to be optimistic at this point.
Yeah, no, there's no other way but to believe. If you want to say that they're not going to win the championship about every single team, you're going to be right 29 out of 30 times there. So let's be a little optimistic. Let's feel good about this Sixers team. Let's see how things take place on the floor. So I think this starts out with a win on Wednesday. I think the Bucks have just as many, if not more, concerns than the Sixers team when breaking things down there. So I would love nothing more than to spoil the start of Doc Rivers' 24-25 season. And that's exactly how I plan for things to go down. So appreciate each and one of you guys for rocking with us for this past hour here. Drop any prediction that you have in the comments below. Make sure you're smashing that subscribe button if you have not already, and following Jacob along at every platform that he is involved in to this point. So smash those buttons. Have a great night, and I will talk to you guys next time right here on Sixers Digest. Peace.